What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? It's Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you once again on behalf of Football Beyond the Stats and our Movement Play of the Week, this week for Week 16 of the 2023 National Football League season. And I wish you all a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, everything in between. I wish you nothing but the best, and I appreciate you all for coming along for the ride for another NFL season here in 2023 as we wind down here in week 16. We'll have one more next week in week 17, and then we go into our all movement team, as well as then our 11th annual mover of the year. So we're winding down, but we've seen some really fly movement skill being on display week in and week out here once again in this NFL season. And this week is going to be no exception as we featured Jahmyr Gibbs, rookie running back from the Detroit Lions, number 26, who helped the Lions capture their first NFC North division title in quite some time. So the patience was rewarded of the Detroit Lions fans, and they obviously were able to do so against their division rival right here down the road from me and the Minnesota Vikings at US Bank Stadium on Christmas Eve. But that being said, with the plays that we're going to look at today from Jahmyr Gibbs, these plays weren't actually that different from that which what he had been doing all season long. We featured Bijan Robinson from the Atlanta Falcons earlier this season. We've also featured a few other rookie movers across the NFL season, but arguably no one has been as impressive as Jahmyr Gibbs, especially when we're taking in consideration that David Montgomery, a person that we featured running back in the stable at the Detroit Lions back in, I want to say, week 4 or 5 of this season. We featured Montgomery, and he's been taking and stealing touches from Gibbs. Now, granted, they're used considerably different from one another. And then we see what else Gibbs has really been able to do when the Lions have been kind of finding their offensive identity. But what they get with Gibbs is a really rare, a really unique, a really special movement problem solver. And that's what we're going to find here today. But that being said, there's still some meat on the bone, and we're also going to show that. I do want to give credit to a number of movers before we really get into the play here today. Jerry Jeudy from the Denver Broncos, wide receiver of the Denver Broncos, Zay Flowers, wide receiver from the Baltimore Ravens, and Greg Dortch, wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals, all of whom we could have featured this week because they all did some nifty and nasty stuff from an agility and evasiveness standpoint. So go take a peek at what they did here in their respective games in week 16, because there's some things to look at. But when we get into what Gibbs did, in one play in particular, one nasty, filthy cut that we're going to feature that you probably saw go viral a bit, you're going to see why we went Gibbs' direction. But, we want to also feature or look at some of the plays that he made in addition to that. One of which would be this first touchdown that he had here on Sunday. Oops, I've got a little bit. There we are. So we'll watch this at 100% speed. We're not going to use this as that play that maybe we're going to dive into as deep as we will the others. But I do want to look at this not only at 100% speed, but also at slow motion, because it starts to show a little bit about who Gibbs is as a mover and what it is that we might be able to expect from him, not only right now in these moments based on his current action capabilities and his current form of life, meaning his current ways of being, doing, and acting, but we're going to be able to see some things that give us some promise about the potential that lies ahead. The thing that you guys have heard me talk about before is this idea that abundance precedes adaptability, or degeneracy in dynamical systems, complex systems, ecological dynamics terms, precedes dexterity, or the ability to solve any emerging movement problem in any situation and in any condition. And all that really means, either one of those ideas, is essentially trying to capture that there are more than one ways to skin a cat, and a player might be in possession of, or may have a toolbox that is equally as adept at reaching in and pulling out a certain tool in a certain situation, or a bandwidth of situations that equally fit the movement problem as adaptably and adaptively. And I think what we're finding right now from Jahmyr Gibbs is he may appear on the surface to be a one-trick pony to a certain degree, and we're going to find out where he might be able to have some room to grow, but there is some writing on the wall here in a positive way. The reason why this leads me to believe that is, even in this first cut, this first local movement problem on this play, as he sucks up into his offensive line as they get the push down the field already 2.5 yards down and away from the line of scrimmage as they push the Minnesota Vikings defensive front. But watch Gibbs and look at him here already be able to start to lower and coil to kind of get underneath the shed, if you will, to lose himself to the defense. We see this deceleration in context, not only here in this type of situation where he's able to gather himself and really load and coil his center of gravity. We don't see him often get into the same types of maybe positions, these really unique and crazy positions that we would find from a Bijan Robinson or a Saquon Barkley potentially, or maybe even a Christian McCaffrey. But what we do see from Jahmyr Gibbs is this really efficient way of moving, particularly in change of direction, sometimes with a tighter base of support, both bilaterally, meaning his feet are together or not staggered, or unilaterally, or more in this kind of hybrid type of way that we're going to see in a play, the next play. But I show you this because watch him get sucked up into this and put this hand out as a feeler. And you guys have heard me talk about that before here at our movement play of the week. That feeler is a measuring stick of interpersonal distance. And it can be a really haptic oriented perceptual pickup or information detection source, to where we're using this to gauge our interpersonal distance, as opposed to our eyes and trying to calibrate how fast we're moving, where we are in relation to, in this case, a teammate, or potentially an opponent who might be coming to oneself, which we're about to see in the second play also. And again, I say all this because it starts to show us the potential abundance that Jahmyr Gibbs already has as a rookie. Okay. It may seem subtle, but let's not miss the forest through the trees. And not only when he's putting this feeler out, notice he's doing it in the midst of executing his cutting action. And it's a crossover cutting action at that. This one that is not necessarily overly sharp per se, because he actually does get some contact then with this Minnesota Viking, but he's able to just use it as a way to deflect energy, as a way to deflect physical contact and the like. And because he got himself so sucked up into this space, it pulls this guy, I want to say this is Blackman, number 5 from the Minnesota Vikings. It pulls him up into that area as well, not knowing if Gibbs is going to come over here or if Gibbs is going to come over there. And of course, that's our landscape of affordances that he keeps open, that I think will continue to get more open for him. What do I mean there? And now, granted, the play is set to go in more off tackle here. But what we would typically find as he gets more adaptable and as things might potentially break down, that there may be multiple ways of being able to solve the problem, right? So this landscape of affordances that are going to present themselves simultaneously at the same time will start to become more inviting only because he's going to begin to perceive them. And I think in certain scenarios and situations, he's sticking to the play call, right? He's sticking to that which what is called. But the longer that he plays in the NFL, the more perceptually attuned, I believe, I got to change my cursor here, the more perceptually attuned I believe he's actually going to be, even in situations like this, where he may begin to look left and right with a scan, as opposed to just already knowing where he's going to take this. And I actually doubt that he might be as perceptually sensitive to continue to be looking beyond to C5, but I'm not in his helmet. I'm not in his visual gaze. I'm not in his perceptual pickup. So he very well might be. But my guess is because he does trust his action capabilities so damn well, and they are special action capabilities at that, that he just trusts that it's going to be there, and he uses that feeler to then move himself into the space as that junk and that traffic begins to kind of occupy that space in front of him. He's able to get into this area where he can put those special action capabilities I just talked about to good use. Notice with Blackman here, again, I think that is Blackman number 5, as he begins to trip and fall, Gibbs might actually pick it up out of his left periphery here a bit. So looking right here. And as he begins to fall, Gibbs actually does look to him right there to try to ensure that he's given himself enough space. Gibbs himself has given himself enough space to be able to hit the gas pedal accordingly. And this is quite a bit of space, of course, to the sideline, and not get you know, caught there either A, from behind, or B, at this slight angle if it's a guy taking a last ditch type of effort and attempt at bringing him down. But these types of scenarios and situations, I would love to see him become more intentional with his perceptual information pickup. What do I mean by that is, right now he has this very special world class for football accelerative burst. Special. Probably maybe even one of one when we're talking about short space, short distance acceleration at the running back position. Notice there how I mentioned he gets lost behind these bodies. So Blackman here, number 5, doesn't know if he's going left or right at this moment, and then he just kind of escapes out of the traffic. And by that point, Blackman is kind of unbalanced, and he's got some other traffic to work through himself. But I digress here a bit. Rewind back to that, which what I was saying. That perceptual pickup, particularly when we're talking about two converging bearing angles, right now, Gibbs trusts that that world class for football accelerated burst is going to be enough to get him home, get him where he wants to be and where he needs to go, where that space is calling. But that world class for football accelerative ability, he can't always rely on, especially at this level. So I would love to see him get more attuned, more sensitive to these bearing angles, particularly when he's off tackle, running off tackle, in space, trying to read an angle of defenders, which right now, at the age that he is, and at the speed and the action capabilities he possesses, um, people aren't really touching him, right? And we see him right there get perceptually attuned to it, but that's a falling defender who isn't presenting much of a challenge. But it's these types of scenarios, these types of situations right here, where imagine if Blackman wasn't falling. Now, again, context shapes content. So Blackman is falling, and Gibbs only has to be sensitive to the what is. I get that. but I'm talking hypothetically. I'm talking about where he needs to go to evolve his movement skills. And we're going to see it a little bit later on. Okay. Because as we get into this video, it's not just about featuring and highlighting the really good stuff. It's about what else that player, especially one that has such tremendous talent and potential for a skill to be otherworldly, to skill to be truly world class in all kinds of ways, like a Jahmyr Gibbs. And I believe that he has that, very much like his counterpart, Bijan Robinson. So imagine if Blackman was actually already facing the same direction and way that Gibbs is. Again, just humor me there if you would, right? Just imagine Gibbs at his angle and Blackman at his, wherever that might be. And notice I'm moving that around, right? Because here, if Gibbs would become more attuned and sensitive in these situations where he's beating guys right now, he will begin to pick up information about bearing angle in relation to his, as well as relative velocity values, speed in relation to his, and how that might be changing interpersonal distance in the gap that is there. Okay, hopefully that makes some sense. I digress because we want to get into the really, really good stuff that is to come. So let's do that right now. So let me take us back to 100% speed here and see if I can find the play I'm searching for. And you guys, like I said, probably have already seen this play. If you haven't, take a peek at Twitter, just type in Jahmyr Gibbs, and you're likely to see this very play from multiple different angles. And this was the one that sort of let me sit up and take notice as somebody who loves to see highly evasive, make a miss ability in all kinds of scenarios and situations. So let's watch and observe this a few times through. And even though he doesn't house this, you're going to see right here, whoop, that was what we found in Jahmyr Gibbs doing something special, putting another NFL player on his poster there in Hakeem Evans, I want to say it is. That's his name, number 21. I think he actually ended up getting benched, unfortunately. Unfortunately for him, that is, after this play or shortly thereafter. And it wasn't just due to that play necessarily, but, you know, he's taken him to the shadow realm, if you will, because there isn't much coming back from that. Not in this respective day, when you get your soul taken as a defender, quite like that. But let's not just pay attention to what Gibbs did to 21 here. Let's also look what he does to a former All-Pro and a perennial Pro Bowler in Harrison Smith. Now, Harrison ends up tripping over his own guy, or at least his own guy trips him up a bit. But nonetheless, we start to see Gibbs in his true flowing like, be like water adaptability. Watch 26 and 21 meet each other in the hole here. And he comes up completely empty-handed. And now DJ Wanham makes a hell of a game-saving play, or touchdown-saving play. They're not game-saving. Touchdown-saving play, catching him from behind. And that's another scenario and situation where Gibbs, at his time and where he is, he's used to running away from guys. But this is the National Football League, and sometimes even an outside linebacker or defensive end has a step or an angle on you and is able to catch you from behind, specifically when you're taking out information out in front or what might be coming next for you. Okay. So these are all things. Now, he can't have eyes in the back of his head, but that kinesthetic sense and awareness, that feel that needs to come right now by playing in the NFL and getting that exposure, getting those reps. This is where the potential we continue to see. And of course, he could train this if he were to be put in scenarios and situations in the practice and learning environment more deliberately that would allow for this too. We see that move. It's ever so subtle, right? We don't even get to truly see how close Harry tries to get to him. And Gibbs kind of just doesn't even do much of anything except for this little subtle shift at the last moment. And we'll see it from a different angle coming up. But this move, guys and gals, at this high of speed, when we're talking about this burst, this acceleration, this 0 to 60 that Jahmyr Gibbs has, to then be able to just immediately shut it down, immediately hit the brakes, and come up with this really authentic, really creative, but also very difficult to calibrate and control movement action. This cutting action that we see is next level. Like, I shouldn't have to say this. The only types of guys I can even think about who might be capable of doing this, that just comes to mind. And you guys know I like taking a highly authentic, like one of one type of approach with every player. So I don't like to make comparisons. But the only player that I can really imagine doing this type of thing, at least at this level, would be like a Jamal Charles. A Jamal Charles who had that type of gas pedal, but also who could coordinate, control, and organize a jump cut in the open field at this type of speed. Adrian might have done it in some situations in subsettings, but not with this kind of smooth ease that we're finding here from Jahmyr Gibbs. So as we look at this, let's remember a few things that he might be attuned to. But I have this sneaky suspicion that Jahmyr Gibbs, with time, is going to get even more sensitive to some of these things. Of course, the first one that we always talk about is interpersonal distance and how that interpersonal distance changes, right? That interpersonal distance, as we talked about before, can be a measuring stick as to when you should cut, but also how you could cut and how quickly your speed is changing that interpersonal distance, especially if you have a guy like Evans who is moving from right to left here ever so slightly, where it's subtly changing also, right? He's just trying to close this because he thinks Gibbs is going there. But of course, he was, and then until he wasn't. And that's the pretty cool thing that we see as well from Gibbs is this ability to kind of like draw a guy into that space. We saw it last week as well. And again, with Kenneth Walker and with what Kenneth Walker did, he didn't do it at this type of speed. So it's even more unique and even more special. I highlight now Evans himself, his posture, his kinematics, his behavior, and how he might be positioned. Now, depending on exactly how his position is changing, as well as what Gibbs might be looking at and when he's looking at it. Remember, affordances are individual and frame dependent. So what is he looking at? When is he looking at? I'm guessing he is seeing engaging interpersonal distance and probably a quick glimpse and grasp of posture, kinematics. Okay. So he might see that this guy is moving in this direction. He might even see, let me clear this and point something out. He might even see the way that this foot and hip and knee is angled to know there is very little opportunity for Evans to come back. So with Evans going this way, very little opportunity for him to come back or close this angle as I'm moving that around. Okay. And I think all of that in a hiccup. Now, he might not be consciously aware of it, but with exposure, with experience, he's becoming sensitive and attuned to these information sources. And this is all informing of him when to cut, where to cut, and how to cut. And that how to cut, you don't have to be explicitly aware of either. You don't even have to pick the right cut, but you have to pick a cut that can be right. Hopefully that makes sense. Meaning it should be practical, useful, and able to fit to the problem. And that's what we find here from Gibbs with this I don't even know what we would call this. I mean, when we look at this from a posterization standpoint, mover and mover, 1v1, scenario and situation we can set up. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Easy to set up this type of thing with multiple types of defenders. But when we see Evans begin to um, start to position his left hip and knee and foot in this direction, that opens up the affordance to act um, right here, right? And again, it's not in how he needs to cut necessarily. He can resort to anything as long as it's fit to the problem. And that's, of course, what he does. And that crossover to jump cut, I mean, that's really what it is. It's a hybrid crossover jump cut, which is not easy to control. That is very, very unique. And I hope that you go and punch it in on Twitter and find all the various angles. You'll see it from multiple different angles, 4 or 5 angles that I found on Twitter. That all are worth watching, because you can see how these problem and solution dynamics, the changing states of organization between 26 and 21 and the unfolding problem are beginning to take shape, and it allows us to tell that movement problem solving story form. So there it is again. I could watch that, as you guys can already tell, on repeat. Now, what I mentioned before about the bearing angle, about him doing more scanning, we start to see it on display here, even though you see Wanham, number 98, already with a head of steam. He's already gotten on his horse. We see 98 right here. He's already begun to take a few steps, and he starts to track this dude down. Now, kudos to DJ Wanham, even though big shout out to him. He got hurt. So kind of prayers up, thoughts for him. Even though I don't know DJ, you never want to see that happen in a guy who's playing his butt off and playing at a pretty high level, a relatively unknown guy that was probably playing himself into some money. And then he got injured on Sunday. But to catch a guy like Gibbs in the open field in any way as a defensive end, outside linebacker is impressive in and of itself. So kudos to DJ Wanham for doing that here. But I think it's these types of things that, as Gibbs begins to become more attuned and more sensitive to juggling multiple information sources, we've seen him look up there right before this with a chasing, pursuing defender. It's this type of thing that I think we'll see the growth from him. There we see him look, and we see him get a quick gauge, but it's not an accurate understanding of what the problem really truly is. He takes this look here and sees where these guys are, right? And understands, hey, I got all of this space out here. But this sensitivity to where that guy might be, again, even though he's not necessarily going to turn and look to him, that feel, that kinesthetic sense and awareness is something that I think will develop while he's still juggling these information sources, these behaviors of these opponents. Still some growth to be had there for Jahmyr Gibbs, but that will come. And then he gets a few updates of it and he realizes, oh shit, somebody was chasing me from behind. Okay. But again, you can kind of see it in his body language. Then he's like, I cannot believe that I just got caught from behind. I don't know who did it, but I should have been more aware. Okay. Let's see some things right here. There's how close Harry actually gets. He does get a hand on him, but it doesn't even phase Jahmyr Gibbs. The other thing that I kind of want to mention, men, remember what I mentioned earlier. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs playing like a coach's dream, going where the play is designed and supposed to go, and just letting things come to him as on a need to be basis. He should be perceptually picking up a little bit more, even though we see him right here connected to Harry, but he moves his eyes ahead and just says, sorry, Pro Bowl, All Pro, multiple Pro Bowl, All Pro, Harrison Smith. That gap is too inviting. It's too invitational for me. So I'm going to move ahead. I'm going right to it. And now it happens to work out in this scenario and situation. But imagine if Harry was just a tad closer and was, or maybe it was a guy who is a little shorter in the tooth as opposed to Harry now in, I think, year 12 or 13 or something of that nature. Um, that is able to close that space a little bit more quickly, or a safety that doesn't get tripped up in the hole. Like, I get it. All these things are what ifs, but these what ifs can quickly lead into the what is. And those what is are those problems that he wants to solve in an emergent, highly emergent fashion. Okay. Again, it works out in this case, and I wish we could see the full view of the movement and the biomechanics that we would find from Jahmyr Gibbs. Unfortunately, we don't, but we do see the perceptual pickup then shortly thereafter as he tries to regain his balance with a very, very big dude coming behind him on his horse. So let's put it back here one more time at this speed. And I understand we're getting a little long here today as I just checked the clock. But it's worth it. It's worth it to dive into this because I think we start to get the glimpse of who Jahmyr Gibbs and what Jahmyr Gibbs can and hopefully will be. Okay. One more thing I want to show you here, just as we get to the 100% playback here. On this play here, we see it again. Okay. And this is the very next play in the highlights. Okay. Him and a defender, open space, right? A lot of open space. When there's a guy that's this fast with this much space to work with, they can't help but try to run and get attuned and sensitive to the space. The space is always inviting them. But I want you to see how this unfolds. Look at how it unfolds and think about what else may have been able to unfold. So Jahmyr Gibbs on this swing pass with the score 23-21, he could end up with a different outcome. That outcome is him in the end zone as opposed to him getting corralled now by DJ Wanham yet again. Okay. I know I'm being a little nitpicky here, but let's watch it at 50% speed and tell me if you think, again, in retrospect, I get it and we're nitpicking, but look at how much space Jahmyr Gibbs has to work with if he becomes just a little more attuned. And all I mean there is sensitive to specifying information about the behaviors of challenging, perturbing, threatening opponents. DJ Wanham, an outside linebacker, defensive end, big dude who's running pretty fast, but is going to have some hard time slowing down. If Jahmyr Gibbs just has his head on a swivel, as opposed to looking at all of this space out here that is obviously inviting him, and rightfully so. There's a lot of space here, and all of this is just calling for him, and he probably does maybe pick up some threats out here. But maybe, just maybe, if he were a little more attuned to the behaviors of 98, he being Gibbs, begins to change his own movement behaviors here to set this up with Wanham. Let's even take it back a frame or two back behind, maybe, if I could. So see it about right here, right? Look at the angle. Again, I get it in retrospect, but imagine the speed that Wanham is moving at, the angle that Wanham is moving at, and also the lack of action capabilities that Wanham might have to be able to slow down this fast moving object. And then think about everything back here that's going to lie right behind where DJ Wanham just filled, and how much more he might be able to do, he being Gibbs, if he were to accept or even perceive set affordance to move into that space. I think he would start to change his movement behaviors much, much earlier and not get corralled then in the way that he did by 3 Minnesota Vikings. But instead, he's likely able to put somebody on his poster. Let me get one little bit back here. And I understand I'm taking like these snapshots, but think about what else might have been able to unfold. He starts changing his gears here because he's sensitive and attuned to the behaviors of Wanham. And he's moving away from these guys with a lot more space to be able to put moves on them. And he might even be going back to his own guy in St. Brown and the like. So again, I understand I'm being very nitpicky there with Jahmyr Gibbs. But the truth and the fact of the matter is this. Jahmyr Gibbs, with more exposure, more reps, more experience, is going to become more attuned, more intentional, and more adaptable around some of these information sources and what they might offer for him for other opportunities to act or move. In fact, I mentioned Jamal Charles earlier. I saw the same thing with a guy that I had worked with Adrian Peterson, guys with world-class for football accelerative burst or speed. Oftentimes when they actually are forced to become more perceptually attuned and sensitive, maybe like in a Jamal Charles or an AD type of situation, they end up, it's a bad thing that ends up making out for good. ACLs or MCLs in both Jamal Charles and AD's case, or maybe even think of a guy more recent, like a Dalvin Cook here in Minnesota. When they actually became injured, they were forced to become more adaptable through picking up other information sources and other opportunities to act. Now, I'm not hoping or wanting that to be the case for Jahmyr Gibbs. I hope that he gets more attuned and sensitive without being injured for it. But I think when he does, maybe it's even just him losing a step and that world class for football speed starts to come down a few notches, as it surely will at some point, especially playing the running back position. I think it's there that we might actually see a more evolved, more mature way of moving. And in that evolution, he's likely to pick up on some of these other opportunities to act that right now he's missing because he's only focused on that gas pedal. But again, let's not get it twisted. That gas pedal quickly turned into deceleration in context and putting one guy, two guys, multiple guys on his poster. And I'm excited about what Jahmyr Gibbs has to come because of those types of things. So I know we got a little long-winded today. I appreciate you guys coming along for the ride. If you like the deeper dive that we took today on Jahmyr Gibbs, as well as focusing on some things and some gaps, some weaknesses that he might be able to improve upon, give me the thumbs up, hit subscribe, share it to your people. I certainly appreciate it as we wind down on this 2023 National Football League season. I'm Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi. I will talk to you guys in week 17.